we covered Emily Thornberry's criticisms of the Labour government over its weak reaction to Israel's genocide in Gaza. Ironic, of course, given that in October 2023, while Shadow Attorney General, Thornberry defended Israel's right to cut off food and water to the civilian population of Gaza, in direct contradiction to international law. Well, Thornberry seems to have kicked off a trend, with former Health Secretary Wes Streeting now criticising his own record on the genocide too. He's now given a statement to The Guardian in which he describes raising concerns over Gaza in government as like hitting up against a brick wall. The context for Streeting's intervention is an exchange between him and disgraced former US Ambassador Peter Mandelson. In one message sent in July 2025, Streeting told Mandelson this: "Israel is committing war crimes before our eyes. The government talks the language of ethnic cleansing, and I have met with our own medics out there who describe the most chilling and distressing scenes of calculated brutality against women and children. This is rogue state behavior. Let them pay the price as pariahs, with sanctions applied to the state, not just a few ministers." Now, in their exchange, Mandelson kind of brushed Streeting's messages off, but he commented on them to Work and Pension Secretary Pat McFadden in another series of texts, saying this: "By the way, I received a wild, long, hysterical message from Wes about Israel. I pushed back. I come forward, but reflects pretty badly on his maturity, in my view. It's pathetic. I think Wes is experiencing an early midlife crisis." Not that early. In reply to one of those messages, McFadden also told Mandelson that Streeting was very active on MPs' WhatsApp groups on the subject and had circulated videos and a note to Cabinet. In his new comments to The Guardian, Streeting has now said this about the Starmer government and Gaza: "In government, I did everything I could behind the scenes to get the government to act with the moral urgency the conflict demands. That included sharing the eyewitness testimony of doctors on the ground in Gaza, whose accounts needed to be heard at the highest level of government to ensure that what was happening in Gaza wasn't a war without witnesses. I wasn't by any means the only cabinet minister pushing for action, but we often felt like we were hitting up against a brick wall. Our concerns and motives were dismissed. I've always supported Israel's right to defend itself and Palestinians' right to a state of their own. I've met survivors of October 7th and was the first shadow cabinet minister to visit Israel. I visited the West Bank a decade ago. I called for sanctions on Israeli settlements when I was a backbencher. This wasn't some emotional or one-sided reaction. It is what I and other ministers believe. I was proud to be part of the government that eventually recognized a Palestinian state, but we took far too long to get there." It seems to me that if you're a minister in a government at a time when a so-called ally is committing genocide, sharing some videos and a dossier of doctors' testimony is pretty much the bare minimum you could do. And that bare minimum, I would say, gets very quickly erased when you're spending your time in the public eye defending Israel or attacking those protesting in support of Palestine. This was Streeting on Newsnight in late October 2023, rejecting the idea of an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
The UN says it's breaking international law. Amnesty says it's breaking international law. The Red Cross says it's breaking international law.
Well, and Israel needs to act within international law, but any
organisations saying it's already breaking it.
Accusations where Israel is accused of breaking international law need to be properly investigated. And I think particularly when it comes to accusations, for example, of the use of white phosphorus, that is prohibited under international law. When it comes to specific targets, schools, hospitals, they are protected under international law. The complication in international law comes in when Hamas are using those buildings as facilities to launch attacks. But in terms of the scale of civilian loss of life, I well understand why people are calling for an immediate ceasefire, but we've got to be really realistic about this. When you've got Hamas that is threatening to carry out the same sort of attacks again and again, and an Israeli government that says we've got to take out Hamas, we're not going to see a ceasefire soon enough to save lives. Humanitarian pauses could save lives.
At that point in the genocide, where many people were calling for an immediate ceasefire and Streeting was calling for a humanitarian pause, nearly 10,000 Palestinians had already been killed in Gaza. In January 2024, South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice over the claim that it was committing genocide. This was Streeting's view at the time.
All right, on Gaza, you rejected the idea of a ceasefire. The South Africans have gone to the International Court of Justice in pursuit of a ruling which would have that effect. David Cameron's told me this morning he thinks that's just wrong. Do you agree?
I think it's a distraction from what needs to happen, which is the diplomatic heavy lifting to bring about an end to this conflict. You know, respect the International Court of Justice. It's for them to make decisions and judgments in relation to South Africa's
But you don't think it's wrong for the South Africans really to raise this issue?
It's a matter for the South African government. They're perfectly entitled to. The ICJ needs to hear their application and weigh up the evidence. But I actually think the priority here has got to be trying to get to where we were actually some months ago now, which is a humanitarian pause in fighting and the diplomatic heavy lifting to bring about the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire, which is what we all want to see.
So, basically what West Streeting is doing at every stage there is just pushing the government line, which is, no ceasefire. Israel has the right to defend itself, even though, 10,000 people were already dead in Gaza by the end of the first of October. ICJ, a waste of time. But suddenly in 2025, when a ceasefire is actually just about to happen, and when pressure is finally being put on Israel, that's when Streeting is apparently sending around the dossier and the photographs and videos and stuff. I mean, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me insofar as the timeline goes. Like we had all these. We know at 2024, during that second video, when that second video was recorded, rather, that the ICJ was that South Africa was appearing at the ICJ. And if you listen to any of that case, they just roll out such a huge amount of evidence of genocide taking place in Gaza at that point. They talk about, prevention of childbirth, and they talk about mass displacement and starvation and indiscriminate bombing. All of the many things that have to be marked off in order for something to count as a genocide. So that is all known at that point. That's all in those files. And there's no saying that Britain didn't know about it, because as we know from Declassified, Britain has been flying spy flights over Gaza this entire time. And as some of the good people at Declassified have often put it, that is probably one of the greatest archives of genocide ever recorded. Those flights, which will not be, the government refuses to share or release. And of course, it's only a few months down the line, in April of 2024, that British citizens are killed in Gaza when Israel deliberately strikes a convoy of the World Central Kitchen. And yet it's more than a year later that Streeting is texting Mandelson saying, it's really awful, isn't it? We must recognize the state of Palestine. Now, I don't want to say, Barry, I think it's really important to say that, it's good when politicians change their minds. It's good when they come out and say, actually, I was trying to do something and I resigned over it because I couldn't do it. But, that's not what's happened here. What's happened here is Streeting has resigned at a certain point, which is politically opportune for him when the Prime Minister is weak. And now we're getting a revelation about, what an amazing advocate he was for Palestinians while he was in government. Thornberry, of course, has not been in government for a while. Very interesting timing that it was just Monday night that she made the comments about her own views on the government's treatment of Palestinians and their failure to protect Gazans. What do you make of the politics of this? What is going on here with the timing? And should we just accept that actually perhaps in these cases politicians really have been trying inside the government and they've just sort of been knocked back and therefore just continued with their jobs and thought, hey, there's nothing I can do.
No. This is a genocide we're talking about. This isn't some sort of minor policy issue. This is one of the greatest atrocities and international crimes of our generation. The Palestinian writer, Omar al-Akkad, coined a phrase, one day everyone will have always been against this, which has now kind of become part of the lexicon of the pro-Palestine movement. And I think that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing exactly that. We're seeing West Streeting. And let's remind ourselves that West Streeting only kept his seat in Ilford by about 550 votes in the last election, coming second to the wonderful Liane Mohammed, who was running against him basically over Gaza.
Yeah, it's like a fraction of a percent, right? Or something like that. It's very, very low, yeah.
So, okay, let's take at face value that West Streeting was angry behind the scenes. By the way, a long time into the genocide. So let's take at face value that he was angry behind the scenes. But did he also go on television after tens of thousands of Palestinian women, men, and children had been slaughtered and say that Israel had the right to defend himself? Yes, he did. Did he also go on television and trot out the line that Hamas uses civilians as human shields? Yes, he did. Did he also go on television and trot out the more heinous line that Hamas launches attacks from hospitals and schools? Yes, he did. He did that. In 2003, former Foreign Secretary Robin Cook resigned from Tony Blair's cabinet over the invasion of Iraq. At the time, I think he was leader of the House. That's a conviction politician. That's somebody who's willing to say, I'm going to walk away from cabinet. I'm going to walk away from my career. That's how much I object to this. Wes Streeting could have done that if he felt so strongly. He could have resigned. Did he resign? No, he didn't resign. Why? Because Wes Streeting is at heart a careerist who has never demonstrated in his career that he actually believes in anything much at all. So the fact of the matter is that, like every other Labour government minister, he ran cover for a genocide, and he should never be allowed to wriggle away from that or forget it.
Yeah. Wes Streeting would rather resign over local election results than a genocide, basically. Right?
Yeah.